At my father-in-law's birthday dinner, he stood up in front of 23 relatives, pointed at me, and called me worthless trash. The next morning, I made one phone call that erased his $15 million empire because the trash he mocked was the investors secretly funding his entire business. This is not just a story, it is a warning about how betrayal always comes back to destroy the betrayer. Before I unfold what happened at that dinner table, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? I love seeing this community grow across the world. And if you believe karma has a way of striking back, smash that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because trust me, you won't want to miss the revenge stories that are coming next. The chandelier above glimmered with warm light, bouncing off the polished oak table where 23 people had gathered for Gregory Harrington's 65th birthday. The Harrington estate, with its velvet drapes and antique furniture, always gave off the impression of wealth and stability, a family fortress. But what the guests didn't realize that night was how fragile that fortress truly was. I had spent the entire day helping Elaine, Gregory's wife, set the dining hall just right. Every plate shone like porcelain sunlight, every wine glass sparkled, and the mahogany chairs were perfectly aligned. I wanted the night to be special, mostly for Daniel, my husband, Gregory's only son, because he adored his father despite the man's harsh nature. Gregory had always been a complicated figure in my life. To outsiders, he was charming and influential, a self-made businessman who had clawed his way into the elite. But behind closed doors, he was cutting, prideful, and merciless. He never forgave mistakes, never softened his words. And to him, I was a mistake. I still remember the way his eyes raked over me the first time Daniel introduced us. He didn't bother hiding his disdain. "She's not what I pictured for you," he'd said coldly, as if I wasn't standing right there. That was 3 years ago. Since then, Gregory's contempt had only deepened. As the night unfolded, laughter and chatter filled the dining room. Gregory sat at the head of the table, his wine glass raised like a scepter, basking in the attention of his extended family. Stories about his early career were retold, how he'd flipped his first property, how he'd turned a bankrupt development into a thriving complex. His relatives listened in awe, nodding, clapping, feeding his pride. I smiled politely, though I knew the truth. Many of those victories weren't his alone. He had been bailed out more times than anyone realized. Investors had saved him, shielded him, pulled him back from bankruptcy when his risks went too far. Investors like me, but no one in that room knew. When it came time for speeches, Daniel stood up first. His words were heartfelt, painting his father as a visionary and a giant. His eyes gleamed with admiration, and though I loved my husband deeply, I couldn't help but ache at his blind loyalty. He had spent his entire life trying to earn Gregory's approval, yet it always dangled just out of reach. Then Gregory rose. He adjusted his blazer, cleared his throat, and raised his glass for silence. The room stilled instantly, everyone waited for the patriarch's grand words. He began warmly enough, thanking his guests for being part of his life. But as his speech carried on, I felt his eyes shift toward me. His smile faded into something sharper, something cruel. "And then," he said, his voice loud enough to cut through the clinking glasses, "there are the mistakes a man makes along the way." My stomach tightened. Gregory extended his hand, his finger pointing straight at me like a dagger. "This," he declared, his voice dripping with disdain, "is Daniel's greatest mistake, worthless trash." Gasps shot across the table. Forks froze midair, glasses trembled in startled hands. Elaine covered her mouth in shock, eyes darting between me and her husband. Heat flooded my face, but not from shame. From fury, I forced myself to remain calm. I would not give Gregory the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Slowly I placed my fork down, folded my napkin neatly on the table, and rose to my feet. The silence was deafening. Even the children, who had been giggling minutes earlier, sat frozen, their wide eyes darting between us. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Harrington," I said softly, my voice steady. "Excuse me," And with that, I walked away from the table. Behind me, whispers erupted. Elaine's voice trembled as she asked Gregory what he was thinking. Daniel half rose, torn between following me and staying glued to his father's side. But I didn't look back. I walked out of the dining hall, down the marble hallway, and into the night air. My heart pounded, not from humiliation, but from clarity. Gregory thought he had just won. He thought he had broken me in front of the entire family, reducing me to nothing. But what he didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that the empire he bragged about, the Harrington name he wore like armor, was built on borrowed money. And I was the one who had quietly supplied a lifeline keeping it alive. One phone call was all it would take to strip him of everything. That night, as I sat alone in a guest house, staring out at the glittering mansion, I made a decision. Gregory Harrington would never again call me worthless trash. By the time I was finished, the man who stood so tall at the head of that table would be crawling through the rubble of his own pride. The guest house was silent except for the faint hum of the pool filter outside. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the shadows on the wall, still hearing Gregory's voice in my head. Worthless trash. The words should have cut me, but they didn't. Not anymore. I had endured too many of his insults to feel wounded. What burned inside me wasn't shame, it was resolve. The door creaked open. Daniel slipped inside, his tie loosened, his face pale. He shut the door gently, as though afraid of making too much noise. "Lydia," he whispered, stepping toward me. "Please don't take it to heart." He was drunk. He didn't mean it. I turned my gaze to him. His eyes begged me to believe him, to forgive, to move on. But how could I, when his father had stripped me bare in front of 23 witnesses? "Daniel," I said slowly, carefully, "your father meant every single word." He flinched, like the truth was too sharp to hear. He sat beside me, rubbing his temples. "You know how he is. He has a temper." "But deep down," I interrupted, my voice low. "Deep down, he's a cruel, arrogant man who has never respected me or you." Daniel's shoulders sagged. He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. His loyalty to his father was ingrained, almost unbreakable. That was the tragedy of Daniel. He wanted to believe the man who belittled him was still worth admiring. "I'll talk to him," Daniel murmured. "He'll apologize tomorrow." I let out a short laugh, not a joyful one, but bitter, sharp. "Gregory Harrington, apologize?" "Daniel, the man doesn't know the meaning of the word. He believes he's untouchable." Daniel reached for my hand, squeezing it. "Then prove him wrong by living well. Don't stoop to his level. Please." I looked at him, my husband, the man I loved despite his blindness. He didn't know the truth about me, about what I'd been doing for the past 3 years. And maybe tonight was the time for him to know. "Daniel," I said carefully, "do you really believe your father's empire is as strong as he makes it look?" His brow furrowed. "Of course, he's worked his whole life for it." "You've heard the stories." "Stories," I echoed. "That's all they are. Stories to cover the cracks." "Tell me, has your father ever shown you his balance sheets? His actual debts?" Daniel blinked. "No, he doesn't share that kind of thing." "Of course not," I whispered. I rose and walked to the dresser, pulling open a locked drawer. Inside, beneath papers and sealed envelopes, was a leather-bound folder. I carried it back to the bed and laid it across Daniel's lap. He looked down at it in confusion. "What is this?" "Proof," I said simply. Slowly he opened it. Page after page revealed transaction records, wire transfers, signed agreements. His eyes widened as he scanned the figures. "Wait," he stammered. These are your accounts." "Yes." "These transfers, they're to my father's company." "Yes." He looked up at me, stunned. "You've been investing in his business?" I met his gaze steadily. "Not just investing. Saving him. Every time your father bragged about a new development, every time he strutted into a room acting invincible, it was because I quietly funded the gaps. Without me, Gregory Harrington would have been bankrupt years ago. Daniel's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Why didn't you tell me? Because you still worship him, I said softly. I didn't want to come between you. But after tonight, after what he said, Daniel, he spat on me while standing on the foundation I built. He called me worthless trash when I've been the only thing keeping his empire alive. Daniel's hands shook as he set the folder down. His face was pale, conflicted, torn between loyalty and dawning truth. He doesn't know, he whispered. No, I said. And that's what makes it perfect. Silence settled between us, heavy and dangerous. Finally, Daniel spoke. What are you going to do? I leaned closer, my voice a blade wrapped in velvet. What I should have done a long time ago, I'm pulling out. Every dollar, every line of credit, every lifeline gone. Daniel's eyes widened. Lydia, if you do that, he collapses, I finished for him. The empire crumbles. The great Gregory Harrington will be exposed as nothing more than a man who built castles on sand. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. His loyalty to his father clashed violently with the reality in front of him. I could see the battle raging behind his eyes. Finally, he whispered, You'll destroy him. I straightened, my voice calm, steady. No, Daniel, he destroyed himself. I'm just taking away the mask. Daniel buried his face in his hands, torn apart. But I felt no pity. For years I had swallowed Gregory's insults, endured his scorn, carried the weight of his pride on my back. Not anymore. That night, after Daniel finally fell asleep, I sat alone with my phone in hand. One call, that's all it would take. One call to my financial advisor to sever the lifeline that kept Gregory afloat. My finger hovered over the screen. My heart thundered. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I make the call. And when I do, Gregory Harrington will learn the true cost of calling me worthless trash. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, but I had barely slept. My phone sat on the nightstand, its black screen reflecting my restless thoughts. One call, that was all it would take. I slipped out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake Daniel. Downstairs, the estate was silent. The grand halls, so full of laughter and chatter the night before, now echoed with emptiness. I walked into the garden, dialed the number, and pressed the phone to my ear. Good morning, Lydia, came the smooth voice of my financial advisor. I wasn't expecting a call so early. I need you to liquidate every position connected to Harrington Enterprises, I said, my voice steady. Pull out every cent, effective immediately. There was a pause. That will devastate them. I'm aware. He cleared his throat. Very well. I'll begin the transfers today. By end of business, they'll be cut off. Thank you, I whispered, then ended the call. I stood there for a moment, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. It was done. The first domino had fallen. Later that afternoon, the storm began. I was in the guest house, reading, when I heard the heavy slam of a door across the courtyard. Gregory's voice carried even through the thick glass windows. Harsh, raised, barking orders. Curious, I set my book aside and stepped out onto the balcony. Below, Gregory stood in the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, pacing like a caged animal. His shoulders were stiff, his face red. I don't care what it costs. Get it back on track. He shouted into the phone. Do you hear me? I said I don't care, just fix it. A pause, his jaw tightened. What do you mean the investors pulled out? Who? I smiled faintly. Gregory threw the phone onto the hood of his car, cursing loud enough for the entire estate to hear. Elaine rushed out after him, her silk robe fluttering. Gregory, what's going on? He turned on her, eyes blazing. Some coward pulled their money. Half our projects are frozen until we find replacements. Do you have any idea what this means? Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. But the party, the guests. Forget the party, Gregory barked. If this doesn't get fixed, Harrington Enterprises will be ruined. He stormed past her, slamming back into the house. I leaned against the balcony railing, watching calmly. For years, Gregory had strutted like a king. Now, with one phone call, I had reduced him to a desperate man scrambling for control. That evening, Daniel came to me, his face drawn and weary. He sat across from me, running a hand through his hair. "It's already starting," he said quietly. "3 of Father's projects have been put on hold. Contractors are threatening to walk away. He's furious." I sipped my tea, unbothered. "Good." Daniel's head snapped up. "Lydia, he's my father. And I'm your wife," I said evenly. "Which side are you on, Daniel? The man who called me trash, or the woman who has carried his empire on her shoulders without a word?" He swallowed hard, torn. I don't want to see you become like him." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "I'm nothing like him. I don't need to scream or belittle anyone. I let my actions speak. And my actions will teach your father the lesson he's avoided his entire life, that pride has a price." Daniel looked away, unable to argue. By the next morning, panic had spread beyond the Harrington estate. Gregory's phone rang endlessly, his voice carrying through the halls as he tried to soothe partners, threaten contractors, and beg bankers for extensions. I watched him at breakfast, his plate untouched, his hands trembling as he scrolled through emails. "Elaine," he barked suddenly. "Call Richard, tell him we'll renegotiate the terms, and get the board on a conference call. Now." Elaine, pale and frightened, hurried to obey. For the first time, I saw the cracks in Gregory's armor. The arrogance was slipping, replaced by desperation. His empire wasn't collapsing in months or weeks. It was collapsing in days. And he didn't even know the face of the person who had struck the blow. That night, alone in the guest house, I stood at the window watching the mansion lights flicker in room after room as Gregory paced, shouted, demanded. He had no idea that the enemy he was fighting wasn't to some nameless investor or faceless corporation. It was me, and tomorrow, when the news hit the papers, everyone else would know too. By the third morning, the Harrington estate no longer felt like a mansion. It felt like a bunker under siege. Phones rang from dawn till midnight. Voices shouted in every hallway. And Gregory stormed from room to room barking orders that nobody could follow. But the real blow came when the headlines hit. Harrington Empire in crisis. Projects frozen. Investors pull out. The words flashed across the financial news networks, spreading like wildfire. Local reporters swarmed outside the iron gates, cameras rolling, eager to catch a glimpse of the once mighty mogul now stumbling under the weight of failure. I sat in the guesthouse living room with the TV on low volume, sipping my coffee as Gregory's name scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Elaine burst into the main house lounge with a newspaper in hand, her voice trembling. "Gregory, it's everywhere. They're saying we can't meet payroll next week." Gregory snatched the paper from her, his face darkening with every word. "Lies! Rumors spread by competitors. They'll see we're still standing." But even as he said it, his hands shook. That afternoon, the board of Harrington Enterprises demanded an emergency meeting. Gregory insisted on holding it in the grand dining hall of the estate, as if the chandeliers and marble floors could mask the decay. I stayed at the edges, silent, watching as men and women in tailored suits filed in, their faces grave. "Gregory," one of the directors began, his tone icy, "half our funding is gone. Projects are collapsing. Creditors are calling in loans. What exactly is your plan?" "My plan," Gregory snapped, "is to remind everyone who I am. I built this empire from nothing. Do you think I'll let a few cowardly investors tear it down? No. I'll find replacements. I'll rebuild." "Replacements?" Another scoffed. "Your reputation is poison right now. No one will touch you." The room fell into tense silence. Gregory's face turned crimson. He slammed his fist on the table. "Then I'll use my own money. I'll mortgage the estate if I have to," Elaine gasped. "Gregory, no." The directors exchanged weary looks. One by one, they gathered their papers and stood. "If this is your strategy, then you're on your own," the chairman said coldly. "We won't go down with you." Chairs scraped against the floor as they filed out, leaving Gregory standing alone at the head of his own table, abandoned. I watched from the corner, my arms folded. The great patriarch, deserted by the very people who once bowed to him. The silence after they left was heavier than any insult. That evening, the house erupted again, this time with family. Gregory's siblings, cousins, and even his adult nieces and nephews arrived in waves, demanding answers. "You promised us returns." One cousin shouted, "We invested because of you. We trusted you." Another cried. Gregory roared back, his voice cracking, "Do you think I planned this? Do you think I wanted this?" But they weren't listening. One by one, they hurled accusations, their voices overlapping in chaos. Elaine tried to calm them, but her voice broke under the weight of it all. Finally, one niece spat the words that hung in the air like poison. "You've ruined this family, Gregory." The room went still. Gregory stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes bloodshot. For a man who had spent his life controlling the narrative, it was the first time he realized he had lost it completely. An eye quiet, invisible Lydia sat on the staircase watching. He still didn't know it was me. Later, when the guests had stormed out and the estate was eerily silent again, I found Elaine sitting in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen. "Lydia," she whispered, "is it true? Did the investors really abandon him?" I met her gaze, my voice calm. "They didn't abandon him. They simply saw the truth. Your husband has been living on borrowed time for years." Tears welled in her eyes. He's not the man I married anymore. He's drowning, and he's dragging us all with him." I didn't reply. What could I say? She had lived in the shadow of his arrogance for decades. Now she was seeing the real cost. That night, Gregory locked himself in his study. The lights burned until dawn. I imagined him pacing, scribbling, shouting into phones that went unanswered. By morning, the headlines were worse. Harrington Empire on the brink. CEO silent amid collapse. Investors demand answers as Harrington projects halt. The cameras outside the gates multiplied. Reporters shouted Gregory's name whenever he dared to step outside. The mighty Harrington image was no longer untouchable, it was a spectacle, and through it all, I stayed quiet, composed. The storm raged around him, but I was the eye calm, steady, in control. He had called me worthless trash. Now the world was calling him finished, and this was only the beginning. The fourth day began with sirens. I woke to the sound of police vehicles idling at the gate and flashing lights bleeding through the curtains of the guest house. My heart quickened, not from fear, but from satisfaction. The reckoning had arrived. By the time I walked across the courtyard, Gregory was already in the driveway, barking at the officers. "This is harassment. You have no right to be here." One officer, unfazed, handed him a thick envelope. "Notice of seizure, Mr. Harrington. Until debts are settled, several assets will be repossessed immediately." Gregory's hands shook as he ripped it open, scanning the words. His face drained of color. "No," he muttered. This can't be happening." Elaine appeared at the door, her robe wrapped tightly around her. "Gregory, what is it?" He didn't answer. He threw the papers onto the ground, storming back into the house like a man pursued by ghosts. The creditors came next. By noon, sleek black cars lined the estate's circular driveway. Bank representatives, lawyers, and accountants filed into the study, their briefcases snapping open like jaws. I positioned myself at the edge of the hallway, listening as voices rose behind the closed doors. "Your accounts are overdrawn. Lines of credit terminated. Collateral will be collected." Each phrase landed like a hammer. Gregory's voice was desperate, his tone shifting from bargaining to threatening to pleading, but the men and women around the table were made of stone. "Mr. Harrington," one banker said firmly, You're finished. Unless you can produce immediate capital, everything goes. The silence that followed was long, broken only by Gregory's ragged breathing. Finally, he slammed his fist against the table. Get out! All of you get out! But they didn't flinch. They calmly packed their briefcases, gathered their papers, and filed out, leaving Gregory slumped in his chair, broken. By evening, the news vans outside had doubled. Helicopters circled above, catching aerial shots of the once proud estate. Reporters shouted from the gates, "Gregory, is it true you've defaulted? Are the rumors of bankruptcy accurate? Do you have anything to say to your investors?" Gregory ignored them, face like stone, but I saw the tremor in his hands. Elaine, meanwhile, had all but collapsed. She stayed in her bedroom, weeping quietly, clutching rosary beads as if they could shield her from reality. The Harrington image was disintegrating not just in the markets, but within their very walls. That night, I found Daniel in the guest house, sitting at the desk with his head in his hands. "He's ruined, Lydia," he whispered. "Everything is gone. The bank accounts, the company. Even the house might not be safe." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I warned you." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But seeing him like this, it's—" He trailed off, unable to finish. I leaned down, speaking softly into his ear. "Daniel, your father built his empire on lies and arrogance. This isn't punishment. It's justice." He closed his eyes, torn. But he didn't argue. By the fifth morning, the seizure began. Trucks rolled through the gates, workers carrying out furniture, artwork, even Gregory's prized collection of vintage wines. I stood on the balcony, watching as strangers stripped the estate piece by piece. Gregory exploded, charging down the marble staircase, shouting at the movers. "Put that down, that's mine." "Do you know who I am?" The men didn't answer. They kept moving, professional, efficient, indifferent. Elaine sobbed in the corner. Daniel tried to hold her. Gregory, red-faced and trembling, turned in circles like a lion trapped in a cage. Finally, he spotted me standing on the balcony. For the first time in days, his eyes locked on mine. The fury there was undeniable, but beneath it, I saw something else. Fear. He knew. He didn't have proof yet, but in that moment, I saw the realization dawning. I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, calm and steady, as if daring him to speak the words aloud. But he didn't. He turned away, shoulders slumped. The great Gregory Harrington finally bent beneath the weight of his own pride. That night, as the estate sat hollow and dark, I walked the empty halls alone. Chandeliers still glittered above, but the furniture was gone, the echo of my footsteps haunting. This was the house where Gregory had mocked me, called me worthless trash in front of 23 relatives. Now it was nothing but a shell. And Gregory Harrington was no longer a king, he was a man drowning in the ruins of his own empire. The sweetest part? This was only the beginning of his humiliation. The Harrington estate was a ghost by the sixth day. Rooms once dripping with luxury now stood bare, walls echoing with the hollow sound of loss. The marble floors were still polished, the chandeliers still sparkling, but the soul of the place, the trophies, the portraits, the art had been carted away like bones stripped from a carcass. Gregory sat in the study, the only room that hadn't yet been emptied. His desk remained, but the shelves behind him were bare. He looked like a captain sitting alone on the bridge of a sinking ship. I lingered outside the doorway, unseen, as Daniel walked in. "Dad," he said gently, "you need to face reality. The company's gone. The banks aren't going to help you. We have to think about what comes next." Gregory's head snapped up, his eyes bloodshot. "What comes next?" His voice cracked. "What comes next is rebuilding. I've been down before. I'll find investors. I'll make new deals." "There are no investors left," Daniel cut in. His voice was firmer than I'd ever heard it. "Everyone pulled out. No one trusts you anymore." Gregory slammed a fist against the desk. "Then they're fools. I built an empire once, I can do it again. But even as the words left his lips, I could see the truth etched in the lines of his face. He didn't believe it, not anymore. Later that night, I found Elaine sitting in the darkened dining room, her hands folded around a rosary. Her makeup was smudged, her once pristine hair unkempt. "I prayed, Lydia," she whispered without looking at me. "I prayed this was just a storm, something we could weather. But it's all gone, isn't it?" I said nothing. Sometimes silence is sharper than words. Her tears fell freely. "He was supposed to protect us. He promised." From upstairs came the sound of Gregory shouting into the phone again, his voice hoarse and wild. But every call ended the same: silence, rejection, humiliation. The Harringtons had become outcasts overnight. On the 7th morning, Gregory appeared at the guesthouse door. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. His suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, his hair disheveled. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin sallow. He looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of his downfall had compressed him. "Lydia," he said, his voice trembling, "I need to talk to you." I stepped aside, letting him in. He moved stiffly, lowering himself into the chair opposite me. For a long time, he said nothing, just stared at his hands. Finally, he spoke. "I was wrong about you." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" His jaw tightened. "I treated you like dirt. I thought you weren't worthy of my son, but you're still here. When everyone else has turned their back, you're still here." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "And what do you want from me, Gregory?" He swallowed hard. "Help me, please. You've always been loyal to Daniel and to this family. If you stand by me now, I can rebuild. Together, we can restore what was lost." For a moment, I simply stared at him, letting the silence stretch. Here was Gregory Harrington, once the towering king of his empire, reduced to begging me, the daughter-in-law he once called worthless trash, for salvation. It was almost poetic. His face tightened. He looked away. I was angry, stupid. I didn't mean it. "Yes, you did," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "You meant every word. You wanted me to feel small. You wanted to remind me that I would never be part of your empire." His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't deny it. I leaned forward, my gaze locking onto his. "And now here you are, asking the same worthless trash for help." He flinched as though struck. "Gregory," I continued, lowering my voice, "I can help you. But you need to understand something first." His eyes flicked up, desperate. "What?" "Anything, just tell me." I let the words hang in the air like a blade. "You've already lost everything. And the person who took it from you was sitting at your dinner table all along." His breath hitched. Confusion, disbelief, and a flicker of dawning horror rippled across his face. I stood, leaving him trembling in the chair. "Tomorrow," I said, my voice cold and final, "you'll understand the truth." And then I walked out, leaving Gregory Harrington staring after me, fear blooming in his eyes. The following day, Gregory tried to reclaim his throne. Despite the repossessions, despite the empty halls, he summoned what remained of his pride and called for a family meeting. He ordered Daniel, Elaine, and me to gather in the stripped-down dining room where the long mahogany table stood bare under the glitter of an untouched chandelier. But when we arrived, we weren't alone. News cameras lined the far wall. A handful of reporters shuffled their notepads. A local TV anchor adjusted her microphone. Gregory had invited the press, desperate to project strength, desperate to show the world he was still a man in control. He stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared, his voice booming louder than it had in days. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "what you've heard about the fall of Harrington Enterprises is exaggerated. Temporary setbacks, nothing more. I've secured new investors, and very soon, this company will rise again." His words rang false, hollow, but he forced them out, clinging to the illusion of power. Elaine sat stiffly, her face pale. Daniel looked down, ashamed. I sat in silence, waiting. One of the reporters raised a hand. "Mr. Harrington, Can you name these investors? Gregory's jaw twitched. Confidential for now. But rest assured the backing is real. That was my cue. I leaned forward, my voice calm but clear enough for every microphone to catch. That's an interesting claim, Gregory. Because as far as I know, no investor is willing to touch you anymore. The room went still. Cameras swiveled toward me. Gregory's eyes widened, then narrowed. What are you implying? He snapped. I rose to my feet, placing my palms on the table. I'm saying that your empire didn't collapse because of the market, or bad luck, or fickle investors. It collapsed because someone pulled the strings. Someone who was closer to you than you ever realized. Gregory's face paled. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The reporters leaned in, pens poised. Daniel looked at me sharply. Lydia. I turned to him, then back to Gregory. The investor who held your empire in their hands was me. The words struck the room like a thunderclap. Gregory stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the table. You? No, that's impossible. I met his gaze, unwavering. It's not only possible, it's true. I've been funding your ventures through silent channels for years. And when you humiliated me, when you mocked me in front of this entire family, I made a choice. I withdrew everything. I pulled the rug out from under you. Gasps rippled through the reporters. Cameras flashed. Elaine covered her mouth, shaking her head. Gregory's voice cracked. You ruined me. No, Gregory, I said softly, coldly. You ruined yourself. I simply stopped carrying you. The reporters erupted with questions. Mrs. Harrington, can you prove this? Were you the silent backer of Harrington Enterprises? Did you deliberately orchestrate his downfall? I lifted a folder from my bag and laid it on the table. Contracts, bank records, shell company agreements, all with my name, all bearing the proof. The cameras zoomed in, lenses capturing the evidence that Gregory Harrington's empire had been nothing more than a house propped up by the woman he once dismissed as worthless trash. Elaine began to sob quietly. Daniel sat frozen, torn between loyalty and the undeniable truth. Gregory, meanwhile, crumpled into his chair. His chest heaved, his hands trembling. For the first time, the mighty patriarch had nothing left, no words, no defenses, no empire. He looked at me across the table, eyes red with rage and disbelief. Why? He whispered. I leaned closer, my voice low but deadly clear, every syllable meant to cut. Because you forgot that respect is worth more than power. And when you stripped me of mine, I stripped you of yours. The cameras flashed one last time, immortalizing the moment. Gregory Harrington, the self-proclaimed king, broken by the woman he once mocked. The press footage spread like wildfire. By the next morning, Gregory Harrington's name was plastered across every financial paper and gossip blog in the city. Empire propped by daughter-in-law's secret millions blared one headline. King brought down from within, read another. Clips of him crumbling in the dining room aired on national television. His stammering, his collapse, my calm confession, all of it replayed endlessly, a humiliation he could never escape. The man who once commanded boardrooms with a single word had become a punchline. The consequences followed swiftly. Creditors no longer answered his calls. Partners cut ties overnight. Former allies denounced him publicly, eager to distance themselves from the sinking ship. Then came the lawsuits, fraud, negligence, misrepresentation. Every skeleton he had hidden in the closet came clawing out now that he was weak enough to strike. The Harrington estate, once a fortress, was listed for sale within weeks. And Gregory? He drifted like a ghost through its halls, a man already erased. Elaine was the first to crack. She withdrew into silence, her rosaries worn thin from endless prayers. I sometimes caught her staring at me with a mixture of horror and awe, as though she couldn't decide whether I was savior or executioner. Daniel, though, was different. He struggled, yes, but he saw the truth. He saw how his father had built a dynasty on arrogance, and how that arrogance had invited its own destruction. One evening, as we packed our belongings from the guest house, he took my hand. "You were right, Lydia," he said quietly. "You gave him chance after chance, and he still treated you like nothing. I don't agree with how far it went. But I understand why you did it." I squeezed his hand gently. "I didn't do this to destroy him, Daniel. I did it to reclaim myself. To prove I wasn't what he said I was." He nodded, though a shadow lingered in his eyes. Family ties, even frayed, never snapped cleanly. "The last time I saw Gregory Harrington was on the day we left the estate." He sat on the back patio, hunched in a wicker chair, staring out over the garden that was no longer his. His once proud frame looked shrunken, his suit hanging loose. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. As I passed, his eyes flicked up, red and hollow. "You destroyed me," he rasped. I stopped, turning to face him one final time. "No, Gregory, you destroyed yourself. I just refused to keep saving you." His lips parted, but no words came. He turned back to the garden, a broken king surveying the ashes of his kingdom. I walked away without another glance. Weeks later, in our modest new home, I unpacked the last of the boxes. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and clean. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. I wasn't the timid daughter-in-law cowering under Gregory Harrington's shadow. I wasn't the worthless trash mocked in front of relatives. I was the woman who had faced the tyrant, exposed him, and reclaimed her dignity on her own terms. Gregory's empire was gone. His pride was dust. And his downfall had been written by my hand. Justice, I realized, isn't always loud or violent. Sometimes it's quiet, precise, surgical, and sometimes it tastes as sweet as freedom. Betrayal always comes with a price, and this was his. If you love stories where karma strikes back, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.